Good morning and welcome to the sixth episode of Exchanges on Exchangers. I am Christy Smith.
And I'm Cosimo Pecchioli.
And today we are very excited to talk about the Open Compute Project, or OCP, with Don Mitchell and Archna Haylock. Don and Archna, can you please give us a brief introduction to our audience?
Let Archna go first.
Oh, hey. Hi, y'all. My name is Archna Haylock, and I am responsible for the community and the projects here at OCP. So I've been in the industry for about 25 years, worked at Texas Instruments, worked at IBM, kind of did a little bit of everything at IBM, given that it's, allowed me to do that. I did servers, I did microelectronics and semiconductors, I did storage, I did networking for a while, and then my last stint was in global technical services. So it was really on the technology front and offering services. So I've been here at OCP for about 4 years, and I've seen it just grow leaps and bounds, and really excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here.
All right. Okay, so I'm Don Mitchell. I am currently the Data Center Division Manager for Victaulic. I've been in data centers or mission critical applications for over 20 some odd years. Probably the first application was I worked inside a welded pipe called the USS Bluefish. And that was my introduction to a lot of the philosophy that I carry forward in data centers today. Over the past 20 some odd years, I've been a director for Schneider Systems Engineering Program, was a global account director for Eaton. And then about 5 years ago, I joined Victaulic to help align the vision of Victaulic with liquid distribution in and around data centers on a global basis. With Open Compute Project, I knew of them when they first started back. Well, I remember when it started back in 2011. And at that time, I saw them as a direct competitor to what I was trying to achieve with Schneider, because they were actually trying to make things simple, where we'd actually made things really, we had a very expensive IT rack. It could accommodate everything in the world. You could put anybody's product in there. And OCP came in and said, wait, for a lot of these commodity servers, we just need a very stripped down basic program. And at that time, I learned to absorb that and change over time. I did not see an alignment with Victaulic's mission of liquid distribution until a couple of years ago, and we'll get more into that as we talk. But that's my basic background. I'm also very active with the organizations of 7x24, AFCOM, Data Center Dynamics, iMasons, and was a member of the Green Grid for many years.
Awesome. Thanks, Don.
Thank you. So, I mean, Don, you kind of already started that, but the OCP, the Open Compute Project, is a fairly well-known organization, but why the two of you don't spend a few minutes to explain exactly what it is and what the goals are for the organization?
Yeah, I was going to say, let me take that if that's okay. Okay, so OCP, as Don alluded, was formed in 2011 formally. Prior to that, I think Facebook had been working on it internally since 2009. In 2011, they decided to actually create a nonprofit organization outside of OCP. And at that point in time, we had Facebook, Intel, we had Rackspace, we had Goldman Sachs as the 4 original members, and then we also had an individual independent investor at the time, Andy Bechtolsheim, the co-founder of Sun and Arista, who everyone knows. Since then, a lot has changed at OCP. We've grown. It started off as just primarily a domestic organization in pursuit of data center activity, primarily hardware. Facebook was doing really well with some of the designs that they had done in Oregon, and they were achieving tremendous amounts of efficiency in their Pineville, Oregon data center. And so they decided take and make all of that open, from the rack to the server nodes, to the storage nodes, to the networking nodes. They kind of opened up all of those specifications. And I think since then, a lot has changed. Our board members have shuffled a little bit just because of their respective areas of priority. And today, our board members are still Facebook, still Rackspace, still Intel. Those are the original three. And then we added Microsoft, I think, in 2014. And then we added Google just recently. And Andy still remains on our board as an individual contributor. So you can see that still very hyperscaler focused, still very data center focused, but kind of growing in the sense not just scaling, locally, but we're now a global organization. So that was the big thing. We have members all over the world, about 200 plus members from mainland China to Japan to Korea to US, Canada, lots of activity going on in Europe. And some of these countries have started to meet locally and regionally. So it's kind of nice to see us kind of now branching out into other parts of the world. And they're addressing local issues. They're addressing local cooling requirements. They're addressing local data center requirements, local laws, and they're all doing it in local language, which is fantastic, right? So really excited to see that grow. We've also kind of scaled out as the data center has started to emerge out of the main brick and mortar facilities. We've now addressed modular data centers, smaller 90 kilowatt, 300 kilowatt data centers. We've addressed, what's happening on the edge. As data center starts to bleed out, edge is starting to take an active role, and the telecom industry is starting to take an active role in what the data centers are doing. So they're starting to now, emulate and leverage the learnings there and share in those learnings. And I think we're starting to see a lot more happening now on the enterprise too, with recent announcements that you might have heard in the news with Target joining as our first retailer. We're starting to see a lot of that happening too. So, the purview of OCP is starting to grow outside of hyperscalers. It's starting to now look at the carriers. It's looking at, retailers that are starting to look at campuses and branch offices more as micro data centers, right? We're starting to look at not just what's inside the rack, but as Don will talk to you, what's outside of the rack is just as important. And how we start to do that in a very, our original tenets were scale, efficiency, openness, and growth, right? But we're all starting to now, in today's world, look at it from a more sustainable environment too, right? How do we do that in a sustainable way? So that's kind of OCP in a nutshell. The one thing that I will say is that we've had independent market researches done on the impact of OCP. Omdia has been following our journey in the last 4 or 5 years. And surprisingly, our impact has grown. The first time they did this was back in 2018, I believe. And our impact was like 5 billion. And it was like really important to us because we had surpassed our absolute imagination to think that our impact could be that worldwide and that large. And we've grown kind of 40% year on year. And the forecast for 2023, I believe, is close to $12 billion.
Wow.
And that impact statement is even more important because it does not include our board member companies. So it does not.
Let me ask you a question. What's your definition of impact?
It's the adoption of OCP and OCP solutions and the ability of OCP to really change the way people are thinking about open gear. So when we start looking at not just hardware, but we're looking at software, and we're now looking at connectors and fluids and, heat in the environment, it's that ability to impact the way people are doing business in the future. So that impact, the numbers are specifically around adoption of OCP gear, but I'm looking at impact in the way that we're really impacting trends and design practices of the future. So I'm going to close now and turn it over to Don, because I'd be sitting here talking forever about OCP.
Well, Archna, I love your discussion, and one thing I'd like to highlight is my perspective on it in terms of, yes, I was aware of OCP from the outside looking in back in 2009, and I was aware when it became incorporated, but I never really saw where my role, which was physical data center infrastructure, aligned with OCP, because OCP basically it started with the ITE, and yes, to the extent that Schneider made some ITE racks or APC made some ITE racks, there was a little bit of overlap, but for the most part, how it did power cooling racks there, or the rest of the solution wasn't. And one of the key things I'd like to highlight is the opening question was, where OCP is a well-known organization. It is for some people. It's exceptionally well-known in the IT industry, but it is still growing in a lot of the other disciplines. And case in point, I was Victaulic. I did liquid distribution, and I really didn't see where we fit with the OCP charter. And actually, a year or so ago, almost exactly a year ago, they had a call for leaders. And I said, I'm not qualified for a leader, but I like what you're doing. Is there any place you'd want me to participate? And just putting things in context, one of the areas that Archna didn't cover is about 4 years ago, OCP started creating a couple sub-projects around liquid-cooled IT to try to standardize liquid-cooled IT the same way they standardized air-cooled IT. And so you have the rear door heat exchanger sub-project, you have the immersion sub-project, and you have the cold plate sub-project. But what you didn't have was a way to plug those into data centers. And recognizing that most data centers today are air-cooled, one of the key challenges for most data center owners is air-cooled IT. When and how will you add liquid to your data center going forward in the future? When will you make this? How can you do this? And I know I've attended at some of these other conferences I mentioned. CEOs and CTOs of other data center organizations were saying that one of the key things that kept them up at night was, they don't need liquid today. Will they need liquid tomorrow? How do they present that? Presented this to Archna, I believe, and some others, and they said, how about we start a sub-project around the integration of advanced liquid cooling, advanced cooling solutions into the data center facility. So we created this advanced cooling facilities sub-project. And it has grown with great success in a large area. One thing, again, from the outside looking in, I was a member of the Green Grid. I have been a member of ASHRAE. I've been a member of a lot of organizations. OCP doesn't compete with those organizations. We try to partner with them and bring it together. Case in point, I was trying to bring the Green Grid because Green Grid is known for their metrics. And one of the key things that Archna was bringing up is this concept of sustainability and efficiency. And just earlier today, I was on a discussion on how do we get there? How do we add sustainability as one of our key sub-projects? And that's going to be a challenge because of metrics. But let's get back to this world of advanced cooling facilities. It's been a great opportunity to reach out to. Go ahead.
Before you do that, Archna, I have a question for you, because Don is talking about subgroups, but I think it would be interesting if you could, in a few words, explain how the OCP is structured.
Yeah.
So what a subgroup is.
Yeah, so happy to do that. As I mentioned, OCP is a collaboration platform. So what we have are projects within OCP, and each project is led by one or two people, depending on the size of the project, and then they also have one representative that is a strategic thought leader. So each project has, 2 project leads that kind of look down into the community, and then one thought leader, our incubation committee rep, that looks up and over. So these projects, we have about 12, 13 projects that are top level projects. So we have data center facilities as a top level project. We have rack and power. We have server, we have storage, we have networking. We have time appliances, which is a brand new project that came in, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Security, open system firmware. So we have all of these large level projects, and then we have regional projects too. And the regional projects are kind of a collaboration of just regional activity. Now, each of these top level projects starts with an initiative or a concept or a work stream, and they, you kind of have the community coalesce around a specific type of rack. So you might have an open rack, or you might have an Olympus rack, or you might have a standard EIA 310, regular rack, right? You could have servers that are operating in the general purpose enterprise environment. You might have servers that are operating in hyperscaler environments. You might have networking that's focused on, access. So each one of these starts off as little tiny work streams. And in the rack and power group specifically, we decided to put the cooling work stream there because it was most relevant at the time there. It wasn't in the data center facilities group, because the data center facilities group was actually dealing with the facility. And we felt that the IT equipment that would go with these cooling solutions would be most impactful in the rack and power group. So we have these 3 different work streams that started off as work streams. They started producing best practices, design guidelines, specifications. And as soon as they had enough momentum and traction, they kind of changed into a subgroup with full-on leadership, with full-on, support from the OCP and a larger, broader community that, could scale globally. Some of these subgroups have, calls that are happening in the morning and happening in the evening. So our poor volunteer leaders are just, working overtime. And that's just to be able to address different parts of the geography, right? Because we want collaboration across the globe. And that's the best way that we can scale, right? We want something that's going to work across the globe, so we're not reinventing the wheel. These subgroups that Don mentioned, they're also created sometimes when there's an overlap between two larger projects. So advanced cooling facilities was born out of this need that we were working on solutions, but we were not taking into account the facility. And likewise, the facilities were not really taking into account some of these great immersion solutions that were coming into place. So this hybrid crossover project was born, and Don and John both sit in both of the groups now. So poor Don had no idea what he was signing up for. He thought he was going to have a little tiny, part of the world. And next thing you know, it's just kind of spanned. So he's sitting in the, the Advanced Cooling Solutions group because he wants to learn from them. Then he's also sitting in the Data Center Facilities group because, what he does in his group applies there. And then he's also working on, like he said, with sister organizations. So he's probably sitting at AFCOM, and I know he's speaking at AFCOM. And he's sitting with the DCD folks because, again, it's a lot about proliferation of the information, but it's a lot about learning so that there is no overlap, and we're kind of leveraging, from our sister organizations. We want to learn from each other and not kind of reinvent the wheel. And there's so many great subject matter expertise on both sides of the fence, and sometimes they know about us, and sometimes they don't know anything, and they're like, hey, wait, I've been thinking about that and didn't know where to go, right, with this concept or this solution, or I'm having the same challenges. So that's kind of how it works. Now, as things grow, our incubation committee, which is the strategic thought leaders, are also looking across other groups, right? So it's a kind of a weird matrix organization, but it seems to work really well. They're looking across the group, and they're also looking across their organization. So Data center facilities is a good example. You know, we've got a gentleman from Google leading it. We've got Rackspace in there. We've got, you know, PCX in there, and they're all working together, and they're going back to their respective organizations and, you know, and saying, hey, look, this is what this is what Don's doing. You know, are you aware of this, right? So I think that that's kind of how the energy flows at OCP. It's all run by volunteer leaders, by the way. The foundation is only 10 people big. And the rest of it is really these giants that, you know, on whose shoulders we stand on, because they're the ones that know the space inside and out, and they're the ones that really help us lead. So it's truly done in a communal way. Does that help answer your questions, Cosimo?
I think it does. So now that we know a little more how it's structured, Don, what is your what is your subgroup exactly? ADF.
Well, I greatly appreciate the background. And one thing as Archna was identifying, I could not have done this in 2019. I was traveling all the time. One of the blessings of COVID, however, has been that I find myself in my office every week at the same time, and I can host calls. And to the point that Archna was making, initially these calls have been focused during a time slot that wasn't favorable to Asia Pacific, and we have had attendees from Chayora and others that attend, but they do so in the middle of their night. So now we're adding a monthly update call for Asia Pacific because we're getting a lot of interest, and we are a global organization. But real quick summary, I'd like to highlight, you know, the mission of the OCP Advanced Cooling Facilities. And we see a mission is to develop global best practices, collaboration, and common guidelines on adding liquid-cooled ITE into data centers. Just kind of really summarizing that again, global best practices using collaboration, common guidelines. One of the key aspects of this is to be successful, we can't be secretive, okay? We can't be proprietary. We have to get as much awareness of what's going on. Give you some examples, some of the work streams we're working on. We have a work stream on just standardizing the method of connecting liquid-cooled IT to cooling loops, okay? Just the method of plugging it in. And in some cases, that seems really boring, but as you go around the world and one of the topics we broke out into a subtopic was thread type, BSPT versus NPT. And I got to tell you, there's few topics that are more boring to debate than what kind of thread to use. But at the end of the day, and the outcome was a recommendation to go with metric, which was not something I would have guessed at. Now, the reality ends up being, is the world going to change overnight to go to metric for 2 inch or under 2 inches connections, okay? And over 2 inch, we looked at grooved couplings as being a method because that's an open standard around the world as well. And is the world going to all go there overnight? No, but if you start coming up with best practices and you share those and you overcome any myths or concerns, then most vendors of these liquid cooled, they don't care about the connection. They care about what's inside the box. So if they always can be, and in today's IT world, we're still refreshing about every 3.5 to 5 years. So a full ITE refresh, someone may say, today I want to use these immersion cool tanks. Next time I want to plug in some cold plate or vice versa. You want to be able to do that as quickly as possible with as minimal amount of interchange as possible. So even such a boring topic as standardizing the method of liquid-cooled connection could have a huge impact on the global success of deploying liquid-cooled IT in the future.
I was going to make one comment. Even though it's a boring topic, Don has held probably, 4 or 5 calls on this healthy debate, and you would not, at least me, being a layman, would not imagine how passionate people get about threads.
You know, I actually wanted to make the same comment. I happen to be in a couple of them, and it's amazing the energy that you can feel in those places. People are really
passionate about it. stand by it. And I'm like, it's a thread. But yeah.
The only thing that matches the passion of threads is the frustration of trying to thread something in with the wrong thread. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there are situations where people unknowingly use threads that almost work. They seem to screw in, and until they start leaking, you don't realize you're using the wrong thread.
And
Which is what.
And if you have 6,000 of them.
Yeah.
So just
in a data center. Oh my God.
So that sort of thing, if we can get a global standard, and again, to make it successful, it has to be global and people have to know about it. The other one topic that I'm really excited about is the OCP guidance on reference designs. In terms of the concept ends up being that data centers have have used liquid cooled data centers have been around for decades. Okay, but the concept of adding liquid to an existing data center is a new concept, and the best way to make it successful is to start with some basic reference designs. Here is a reference design for deploying liquid-cooled rear door heat exchanger. Here's a reference design for cold plate, or here's one for immersion. And you put these into a BIM type document. And the concept of going from concept to construction, perfect prefab at the speed of thought is, well, obviously it's a little bit of hyperbole, but the concept is there and it can be done. And that is the way it has to, because you're not going to want to have a construction team coming into your data center to add pipes, but you are going to have to add pipes. So you're going to want to have something that is defined precisely at a BIM content. I learned that there's actual several standards of BIM around the world, but in the United States, we talk about LOD 350 and LOD 400. And these are construction standards that make it very easy for you to put things in. And most importantly, people need to make room for the pipe, leave room for the pipe. Even if they're not going to use pipe this year or next year, you can't create space where you didn't preserve it. So that's one of the exciting things of reference designs. So those topics there have been great. One of the key goals of socializing is myth busting. Mm-hmm. And one of the challenges we have with any kind of practice in data centers is that perfect, reliable, consistent installations don't become famous. The ones that become famous are the ones that break, okay? So you can have a zillion data centers that are using liquid-cooled IT and doing fine. And when one of them breaks, everyone hears about that one. And so socializing around the world and saying, look, these are practices that people are doing and they work is key to advancing liquid-cooled IT. Now, one thing I would also say, my team doesn't, or our group, we don't focus on the benefits of liquid-cooled IT. We leave that to the sub-projects associated with those products. But generally speaking, in fact, I just saw a commentary last week on LinkedIn where liquid-cooled IT is good where ROI makes sense. And my comment was, the response to that was, reducing investment expands the ROI window, the opportunity. So anything we can do to make it easier to deploy liquid-cooled IT, now you actually have the return on investment is something we can look at with a broader scope of solutions. And so if you talk to the team leaders of the immersion tank or immersion or cold plate, they will discuss extensive benefits of their industry, which is why they're growing. We're just trying to make it easy to plug them in. I can also give a context that 2 years ago, I talked to a data center owner, and he said one of his customers came to him and asked what would it cost to add a liquid loop. And he said about $270,000, at which point the tenant said, well, I guess we don't need to add that. What we're looking at doing is driving down that cost, making sure that you don't have to use such a term, and you can actually preserve or the opportunity to add liquid-cooled IT. Coolant CDUs, coolant distribution units, has been a recent topic, and I throw this back to the wonderful world of Cosimo, who's actually been speaking a lot. Cosimo, what is a CDU?
it's a coolant distribution unit, but this is not about this podcast. Is not about me. It's about the OCP, but it is definitely one of the arguments that we have been talking about, and Christy and I are part of that group, and it's a chance to confront ideas, and Don has been a fantastic, let's say, organizer for this group. And I found that the OCP it's a really great way to bounce off ideas with people that have different point of views and hone down what it could be a range of best possible solutions. That there's never a silver bullet that it's good for everything, but if you incorporate different ideas and different point of views, you can narrow down that from any possible thread that you can have in the word to metric or a couple of options. So
Don mentioned that it was a new industry, and I say it's not a new industry. I think it's a scary industry, right? I think it's the fear factor is there. People want it, but they don't know where to start, number one. It's overwhelming, so they don't start at all. And number three is that the cost metric isn't quite there yet to force them into a position where they have to start, right? So I think that what we want to do, and what Don and his group are attempting to do is, number one, do the myth busting. It's not as scary as it sounds, right? Put some best practices in place to show that, hey, people have done it before and they've done it fairly easily. Yes, it requires some work, but it can be done, and it can be done successfully. And here are the lessons learned and the best practices and the design guidelines that we can all rally around. And number three is, I think that it's awareness, it's forethought, right? So that if you are thinking about it, maybe not today, but there is a chance that you're expanding your data center, or you're building a new one, or you're thinking about a micro data center in your facility. Those are the kind of things that you need to think about today in order to get advantage of it, take advantage of it, maybe a year from now, right? When you do have the demand and the cost does come down. But that real estate is super premium. So if you don't build for it today, they will never come. It's a field of dreams, right? You have to build it in order for them to come. And so I think that those are the kind of collaborations that really are healthy, because it really forces people to challenge themselves and the industry that this isn't as difficult as maybe we thought it was. It was difficult 10 years ago, right? It was probably difficult 5 years ago, but here we are, and it may not be as difficult because people have done it. And let's learn from, let's leverage those lessons. So I guess that's the long and the short of OCP in terms of, and this is just one application. I think it applies across the board to all the different initiatives that we're bringing forward. Sustainability is a good example too, right? Heat reuse keeps coming up, right? What do we do with it? What do we do with it? What do we do with it? And it's too much. Oh no, I don't have a way. But I think you got to break it down. And even in OCP, we don't know what sustainability means, right? It means different things. It's such a big thing right now, and it's a buzzword that everyone's using. But when you break it down, we're trying to figure out, what does that mean? Is it reusing IT gear? Is it reusing heat? Is it reusing the liquid? Is it, what is it? So I think that the community really is trying to understand what the relevance is to them. And then, of course, all of our corporations have these giant, net zero carbon footprints, and we got to do this by 2025, and it's going to have to be a healthy combination, because I think that we're right on that cusp of defining what that is. And once we get there, it's going to be smooth sailing. But getting there and getting enough people in the boat and everyone rowing in the same direction, I think is going to take a little while. So,
well, I mean, you're doing a fantastic job with the OCP. I just one brief comment, because we are running out of time, unfortunately. But one of the challenge of this industry is how secretive it is, how the information are not shared a lot, and the OCP having this kind of open forum and a safe space It's very, very helpful. I think it's a fantastic initiative, personally.
I do too, and I was going to mention that about 40% of our listeners are actually from Europe and APAC, so they will be listening to the OCP also. Can you tell our listeners who can get involved in the OCP community and membership and where to go?
So our calls are open to everybody. Hashtag OCP open for all really does apply. We don't have any passwords on our websites. We don't have any passwords on our wiki. Everyone is can subscribe and get on a call. In fact, we actually have all the call details listed on our project calendar. So if you go to www.opencompute.org and the top level menu says project, and you drop down to the project calendar, or you drop down to one of the projects like data center facilities, you'll see everything listed on it. And the wiki has a way to get a hold of Don as well, right? So everything is transparent. If you are going to contribute, that's when things get interesting, because contribution does require membership. And so we do require you to become at least, a basic member, and that's $2,500 US per year. It's an annual membership. And that allows you to contribute and become part of one of these work streams and help author, these documents, or author a spec or whatever you want. But participation in our summits, in our workshops, in the calls, it's open to everybody. And Don, if you're interested specifically in any of the work streams, you can reach out to Don directly. My email is published on the website. You can reach me on LinkedIn, Twitter, WhatsApp, WeChat, Instagram. So, membership is not required to participate.
Right, and just to highlight, when you say $2,500, that's the entry, the community membership level for an organization, correct?
Yeah, it's a global. Yeah, it's a corporate membership.
It's not just for one person.
Yeah, it's not just for one person. It's a global corporate membership. So if you're a company that's based in mainland China, or a company that's based in Germany, and you happen to have people all over the world, everyone for that $2,500 can join any of the projects. So it's not just limited to one project or one group. You're welcome to join anything. And again, that's only if you want to contribute. If you don't want to contribute, you can join for free, and you can join as much as you want. In fact, we would love to hear about you, and we would love to see what you're doing and hear what you're doing and the challenges that you're facing. Contribution in the OCP space really means sharing of ideas and sharing of IP. And you are not assigning that IP to OCP. OCP is not a legal entity that can take in IP. What you're doing is you're making that IP open to the public under a royalty-free patent non-assert and a royalty-free copyright agreement. So all of our calls are recorded, and you can go back and listen to all the past calls. It's like a podcast like this. It's on YouTube. But if you want to contribute, then we do need your company or you as the individual to sign a licensing agreement, and that requires membership. So.
Right. So I just want to highlight a couple things. The whole validity of our program depends on participation and awareness. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so I know we've said this a bunch of times, that we're seeking to leverage collaborative, voluntary guidance. And if we come up with great thoughts, but we don't share them, or people think that they are exclusive or proprietary, then they just become the Sony Beta of the VHS world, if you will.
Yep.
A product that
the 8-track.
The 8-track. It goes away because someone's patented it, and something better comes along. We have participants on my team from ASHRAE, from pretty much all organizations out there. So we are trying to pull them all together. And I'm learning a lot from a lot of different, even secretive organizations. I'm not going to mention any search engine organization that be by name, but I will tell you that they've requested to be on what I call my steering committee, people that are giving me direct advice to make sure that I'm not, and she mentioned earlier that John Minash is my co-leader. Everyone has an agenda. I'm trying to make sure that I keep mine off the table and not part of OCF's vision or ACF's vision. And that's why we bring in people from Microsoft and from that search engine company and from Facebook and all those others that are behind the scenes, and Intel and others are providing direct feedback on where we should be going with these weekly calls.
Yep. I was going to say academia and research labs are invited for free. And we would love to have academics and research labs involved because they're at the forefront of a lot of this. And we're finding that, while they may be familiar with ASHRAE or they may be familiar with Green Grid, they're not that familiar with OCP. So we do have a future technologies initiative, but this is something that we really do need, the best and the brightest out there to really share their concepts and their ideas because, I think that's where the future lies, right? And then all of our specs are also open. So, it's great that we come up with these specifications, but if there's no product, then it doesn't make it usable. So part of it is also not just having reference designs and documents and having these great best practices or design guidelines, but also kind of culminating that into specifications that are community defined. Right? And then leading to products that are consumable by the public, because at the end of the day, these data center operators, these colos, these retailers will have to adopt it. And if it's not adoptable, then we failed ourselves, right? We've just spun and we've just gone and chased our tail for no reason at all. Mm-hmm. And so that's the beauty of the open source is that you start with these great design practices, you start with these baselines that eventually culminate into specifications, that culminate into tangible products, that culminate into OCP-ready facilities, right, with solutions that are both hardware, software, and immersion and liquid into the environment. And then, then we move forward. Then we move into what's sustainable, right? And rinse, repeat.
You have those $12 billion impact that you were mentioning at the beginning.
That's right. Yeah. Yep. We have to be able to impact and make that impact. Otherwise, that's one of our basic tenets, and we hold every single contribution up until that, to those 4 tenets. So if we don't do that, then we failed our community.
All right. I mean, I unfortunately we are running out of time. We could talk for probably days about what you have been doing. It's so interesting. There's so many different things that I strongly encourage everybody to at least check out the website and all the different projects, because if you are in the data center market, it's almost impossible that there's nothing that is interesting for you. There's definitely something that is for you.
Come and listen. Yeah, just come and listen. That's all we ask.
Thank you so much, Archna and Don. This was very interesting and educational conversation, and hopefully we'll have a lot more membership after this podcast for you. And as usual, if you have any questions, you can find us on LinkedIn. Again, I am Christy Smith.
And I'm Cosimo Pecchioli.
And we hope you like this podcast, and we'll see you next time on Exchanges on Exchangers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.